Now as I'm asking you a question, the memory is coming, right? And you can experience it as a sensation, image, feeling or thought, right? Where was that before I asked you the question? Where was that experience before I asked you the question? Now, traditional neuroscientists will say, it was in my brain, but I work with the best neuroscientists, my colleague, collaborators, Rudy Tanzi at Harvard, the chief neuroscientist and geneticist at Mass General Hospital. I said, Rudy, next time you have a conference, and he had 150 of the best scientists. And I said, ask them, where is memory stored in a cellular level? Guess what? Not one of them could answer. Okay? We know that when I asked you that question, and before you said salad, that there was a memory somewhere, but we can't find it in the brain. Can't find it in the brain. Do you remember the house you lived in when you were a teenager? Can you see it now? So what are you seeing? You're experiencing sensations, images, feelings, thoughts, because those memories are associated with other memories. If I go inside your brain, do you think I'll find a picture of your house? Or do you think there's some neural network where there is salad? So what happened? When I asked you the question, a sensation, image, feeling, thought arose from consciousness, and then it subsided in consciousness. And that consciousness is transcendent. It doesn't exist in space-time. So where do we go when we die? Where that salad was before I asked you the question. Okay? We don't go anywhere because we are there all the time. Okay? In fact, every thought comes from there. Every memory comes from there. Every desire comes from there. Every bit of imagination comes from there. Insights, intuition, imagination, creativity, choice, all comes from there. And we have to be there in order to retrieve it. You retrieved it from your transcendent self. And being transcendent, it's not a space-time event. But as you actualized it, then there was a little space-time. Okay? Ramana Maharishi, when he was dying, people said, "We are going to miss you." He said, "But where am I going?" Okay? What we call the physical world is a quality of awareness within awareness. What we call the mental world is a quality of awareness within awareness. What we call the universe is a quality of awareness within awareness. And if you can just anchor yourself in that little space, the openness that Eckhart was saying, it's your ticket to freedom. It's the ticket to freedom. Why? Because it's the you that never dies. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, water cannot wet it, wind cannot dry it, weapons cannot shatter it, fire cannot burn it. It's eternal, it's unborn, because birth is a space-time event. It doesn't die, because death is a space-time event. A space-time event is part of the flux. So I think that's all I really want to say. Okay? Now, that's one minute. You know, we do these retreats because sometimes people haven't sat down or been quiet for a long time, and it's almost impossible for them to be present, so the retreat helps in taking you there. In fact, I do retreats myself in silence. So about 2 years ago, I took the opportunity to go to a monastery in Thailand, in the north of Thailand, and we had a very interesting routine over there. Okay, and the routine was that first of all, we shaved our head and our eyebrows, and we were barefoot, and so it was, everybody looked the same, and there was no social mask. Secondly, we had to go begging. It wasn't called begging, it was called the alms round, to find our food every day. And then, people were so generous that we came back as if we had gone shopping to Whole Foods. And then we shared our meal, and one meal a day, and the rest of the time was spent in silence and observing impermanence. Because, you soon realize that everything you're looking at is this flux, it's impermanent. And it had a very dramatic effect on all of us because it threw us in the present moment in a very interesting way. And so when we were leaving, and the abbot, the senior abbot who was the head of the monastery, is about half my age, and we were in silence most of the time, but, in the evenings we had like 2 hours where we could talk to him, and he would ask me questions about quantum physics. And I realized he knew everything. There was nothing I couldn't tell him. He had never read a book. He'd never learned mathematics or anything, but he had the experience that it wasn't difficult to explain to him what I knew intellectually. And on the day we were leaving, we were all in his presence, and he had a very gracious presence, just like Eckhart has. And he left us with 2 things, and I want to leave you with those 2 things, okay? The first is, and this is both scientific insight and real insight, okay? There are no boundaries in the universe. Every boundary is conceptual. In reality, there are no boundaries. We create them, just like we create latitude and longitude for purposes of convenience. So if I say, meet me on 56th and Broadway on Tuesday at 6 p.m., now we've created an agreement for a boundary. But in reality, there are no boundaries at all. And the second thing, which you already know, is the present moment is the only moment that never ends. Okay, the situations and circumstances around the present moment will change, but the moment won't change. Because it's timeless, it's transcendent, it's eternal. So I'll leave you with what my abbot said to me. He said, the most important time in your life is now. The most important person in your life is the one you're with now. The most important activity in your life is the one you're involved with now. And if you do that, the unknown will become known to you. The unknown is actually known only in the present moment. And that ultimately will lead to the conquest of death. Because death happens in time. Only that which is born dies, but that which is never born cannot die. Okay? Thank you. By the way, in the spiritual literature and in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, they talk about supernormal powers. They're called siddhis. Have you heard the word siddhi? Siddhis are dormant potentials, the ability to see in the future, the ability to experience the past, know previous lifetimes, remote viewing, remote healing. And I'm experiencing a siddhi right now. And it says that Wayne Dyer is in this room. There he is. and you thought I wasn't psychic. So I'm going to first have a conversation with Eckhart, and then perhaps you can join us for a few moments. Okay, so Eckhart, these questions have come through Facebook, and I've picked up the ones that have come most frequently.
Can I just, before you were talking, you were in the Buddhist monastery in Thailand, and there's this Buddhist scripture that came to mind that is one of my favorite sutras. I don't remember what it's called. It's a famous sutra. The Buddha is supposed to have said it, but of course you never know. But it says, so the Buddha is speaking to the monks, so he says, "There is, O monks, the unborn, the uncreated, the unmanifested. If there were not the unborn, the uncreated, and the unmanifested, there would be no escape from the born, the created, and the manifested."
That's so beautiful. Even the idea of freedom is an idea. Beautiful. So, I actually think I know the answer to this, but this is for you. It says, can you describe your daily spiritual practices? Have they changed over the years?
Well, I don't, as you probably know, I don't have a practice as such, not a formal practice as a separate activity from ordinary daily living, but what naturally arises a lot of the time is spacious awareness. So I sometimes say it's a humorous, meant to be taken humorously. It's my greatest achievement in life is that I don't need to think all the time anymore. And that makes life into a much more pleasant experience if you can be there just as the presence. And so it's the intensity as I experience it may sometimes varies. Sometimes presence can, in certain occasions, almost obliterate everything else. And at other times, it's always there's that space in the background. So it's hard to describe, but I'm sure you all know. You've already, almost all of you, have experienced it. If you're not yet permanently in presence, that's fine, but it is arising. So actually alignment with the present moment is, you could say, is my practice, but it's become second nature, so I can't call it practice anymore.
Okay, so I'd like to kind of say what my practice is, because I actually was a disciple of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi for many, many years, and he did, in fact, initiate me into the practice that we all do here. And after a while, I did realize that the practice was like a tool. And for me, I still do it because I'm so used to it. And besides that, sometimes, even though I ignore the thoughts, they give me great ideas, and I make a living by selling words. So I stay with the practice. Eckhart, how would you define happiness? Is being happy a realistic goal?
Is it a realistic goal? Well, it's partly a question of semantics, by which I mean what do we mean when we say happy? I personally don't use that term very much, but I know that, for example, Ramana Maharshi said, your true nature is happiness. Happiness is your true nature. So he uses the term in a particular way. I wouldn't use the word that much because for most people, in common usage, happiness is a high. You experience a high and usually a temporary high. I'm so great. Yeah. And so it's, you cannot be on a permanent high. So if you have a high, you also experience the low. Oh, I thought that was going to be it, but it wasn't it. So the term that I would use is spaciousness, joy, perhaps. It's that which makes the Buddha smile. When you look at statues, the good ones of the Buddha, in the bad ones he looks miserable. But in the good ones, there's just the hint of a smile on his lips. And why is the Buddha smiling? If you approach Buddhism from a purely intellectual viewpoint, in some universities they'll tell you that Buddhism is a life-denying religion because they don't really understand it, they only understand the statements. And Buddha said emptiness is the ultimate answer, which of course is true, but you cannot, if you've never had even a glimpse of emptiness, you will think it's life-denying. So the Buddha has a slight smile because no matter what the Buddha experiences, he experiences everything against the background of emptiness. Another word for which would be spaciousness, or another word for which would be stillness. There's always that stillness, and the Buddha is the stillness. The Buddha is rooted in the stillness, which is, when we use words, we create a duality, but the Buddha is the stillness. So that is really, I think when Ramana Maharshi used the term happiness, and I don't know whether it's even a correct translation from what he used in his native language, that is, I believe, what he pointed to. I personally would not use the term happiness. I don't know about you.
Well, in the Buddha's teaching, there are 4 qualities of consciousness that he calls divine. So the first is loving kindness. The second is joy, which is not happiness. Happiness is a thought, okay? Joy is without thought. The third is compassion. And the fourth is equanimity. And if you really think of these qualities of consciousness, they're actually, at a very primordial level, they're not thought. Okay? None of them is thought. All these are very subtle ways of communion, which means me and the other is one. Okay? So when Eckhart said, happiness is high and lows, yeah, happiness is a melodrama in a way, and joy is not. Joy is essential. This question on Facebook: I'm an artist and drew inspiration for my work from the simple and genuine love that existed between me and my husband until I found out that he betrayed me. Now I feel like my core is empty and my creativity is dead. How do I inspire myself to dream and imagine again?
Well, that's a sad story, but it comes from...
It's a story, though.
It is, of course, it's a story. But as long as that is very real to you, there's suffering in it. And there's a way out. I'd like to point the way beyond that for this person. Your husband betrayed you, okay? Your husband is a human being, I assume. Now, I love that term human being because we have two words here. We have human and we have being. Now, that which the love in you, when you were in the presence of your husband, that which you loved in the husband was the same in you. It was the being quality of that human. And the human is the form as which that he assumes that form. And that form is imperfect. So when you don't know, when you bring them together, you think that that love was an illusion, but it was not. You just haven't recognized that there is the dimension of being in him and in you, and that's from that recognition love arose. But the mind mixes it up with the form, and the form is imperfect. And so because of that, now, because you have the thought, what you're telling yourself in your head is now blocking that deeper awareness. The story that you believe in your head, that you are telling yourself, is blocking the deeper awareness of being. And that is, once you recognize that, you can feel that love again, because that love is who you essentially are. And so, and then the possibility of forgiveness also arises. Your husband, you forgive the human and whatever unconsciousness the human manifested. But the real forgiveness cannot arise until you know yourself as the formless, no longer identify with what arises in the world of form. And then you can look through that, and forgiveness arises naturally.
Could we say that the husband is a human being, but he was also being human?
Yes.
What is the best possible outcome of a life that one could hope for? What should we strive to create for ourselves? Strive.
Well, the best and the one single worthwhile, truly worthwhile thing is to encounter, to realize, to discover transcendence in your life, so that you're no longer trapped in that narrow, personalized, form-identified, thought-identified sense of self. And if there's nothing to you but that the person, then life is a very frustrating business. And this is what the Buddha referred to when he used the term suffering. He said, whatever you do, wherever you go, you will encounter that. But he also pointed the way beyond. So there is the possibility of realizing your formless, true nature. And that begins with a gap between two thoughts. It begins this moment when your attention moves fully into this moment. Not just awareness of sense perceptions, but also, and this sounds a little strange, but it's key, awareness of awareness. So if you can be aware at this moment, not only of that which arises in your immediate sense experience or thoughts or emotional field, but if you can be aware, in language we always, of course, language always creates duality, so you have to make allowances for that. If you can be aware right now, it can only be realized now. If you can be aware that you are aware right now, in addition to things that you perceive, there is a space of awareness. That is what makes life worthwhile. And then, when that arises and then becomes a living realization in you, that is really the one thing, as Jesus said, there's only one thing that truly matters. And then you have chosen that one thing. That's the Mary and Martha story in the Gospels, where Jesus said to Mary, you have chosen the one thing that really matters. Whereas Martha was running around, I have to think about this, do this, get this ready. There's one thing that truly matters. And then the rest of your life, what form it takes, is secondary. It will unfold beautifully. With, of course, comes nothing is permanent, and you won't need to cling to things anymore and be afraid that they leave you. And very important, you won't have expectations that the world is going to make you happy. This is a very fundamental thing that it's an error in their mind. They believe that the world somehow has the ability, if they could only engineer things in such a way that everything would just fit neatly into place,